Hello everyone. Um, this is introduction to DevOps. Again, we meet again, and with me, Ariawan Kusumadono on Visual Studio Indonesia. We would like to continue previous discussion. Now we are going to see what is DevOps is related to the previous condition or scenarios in previous videos that you have a DevOps or not. But situation may get worse if you don't have DevOps at all, right? Okay, so let's have a quick refresh. The goal of this course is knowing what without DevOps, and then having a gentle intro to understand of what is DevOps, and then basic elements of DevOps implementation. I'm going to use Azure DevOps. It is not uh, mm, favorite, my favorite, but I'm going to show you the easiest way. Why I choose Azure DevOps? I know that I may be opinionated, but please bear with me because the elements of having a good DevOps, and as far as I know, one of the product that has it is Azure DevOps. We will discuss this in detail later, and discuss the discussion will not discuss about any infra related deployment such as Kubernetes servers or not. And then we are not going to discuss about technology specific, especially the tooling. Again, I use Azure DevOps. It is the one of the quick tool that is easy to use and sample tools to cover most of the features, if it is not all of the what DevOps is. I'm not also going to discuss infra and software development specific, especially using a platform or runtime. In this sample, I'm going to use .NET, but you can use other tools, other platform, other runtime. Okay, and this is about me. You can see on my channel, and this is a Visual Studio Indonesia, Visual Studio underscore Indonesia, and this is the previous chapter. Before we have a app development, no version control, silent mental model, no clear distancing of responsibility, and more like it is people problem because the people may not be communicate well, those two, right? The dev and the ops. Okay, now why it is important? We have to, you know, connect the ideas of what DevOps is, and then the reasons why, and why I told you before that if you say, okay, I already have DevOps in place, it may not be a even for basic DevOps, you don't have it. You don't actually have it. Why? This video will try to discuss about that. I'll try to be as simple as possible based on my own experience and based on the ideas that already there, especially the ideas from Microsoft and also the ideas from large companies such as IBM and others. What is DevOps? A common definition is a collaboration of software development and its operations in the scope of departmental responsibility, communication, people, and process. There is a definition that to me it may be a little bit harder to understand instead of the definition from Microsoft, but those two are basically the same. The semantic may be a little bit different, but those two are actually the same. So, based on Microsoft in 2026, this is DevOps. DevOps combined development and operation, so Dev and Ops department, to unite people, process, and technology. Technology in this sense is actually the tooling and the chain of the environment and setup in application planning, development, delivery, and operations. The technology, that definition is basically the tool used, but again, the people and process always come first. You can see in the link. I'll also give the link in the description of the video. What is DevOps? So you can also make a quick go to Microsoft resources of DevOps using aka.ms/DevOps. I'll also give you the link in the video description. And now we have a quick visual. You'll see that in most references, books, articles about DevOps, you have a circling infinite of DevOps logo, from the plan to build and continuous integration, deploy, and then operate and continuous feedback. I'm not showing the bug fix because actually bug fix comes from the continuous feedback, but it also comes from the build, because when there is a bug being found by the unit test, you have to fix it as soon as possible. And if there is a bug on the test space, this is something that, yeah, it should be here, the test to the SIT, UAT before going to production. But my point is, all of those SIT, UAT production will usually be done after deployment in this phase. So we have deploy. Then, based on this logo or pictures, that operate could be done by the tester, by the user directly. Even in production, you you can say that your app is also being used, and that means that being used is also being tested directly. There is a saying of shift left and shift right, but I'm not going to discuss that right now. It's about the concern of how early you are going to have a spot for the test, and also how are you going to do after you deploy. Which is why if I say about having a test as soon as possible in this unit test, this will be done in the build and the continuous integration, of course, as early as possible. And also, when you have done deploy that, you are going to have some tests. It is not easy to directly test, even from for a developer perspective. This is why there are many techniques to be used available for us, not just from actual feedback from users. Why I mentioned about people and process come first. If you remember from our last discussion in the chapter 0, those people, dev and ops, they have some kind of drama, if I'm not mistaken. That drama, that ops is usually asking for correctness of the apps before you are going to deploy. And the development asking for change. Every time you deploy an app, it is also a change. When you say, okay, I'm just going to add this app into the server or should be part of the distributable apps such as desktop app, you are going to perform a change. Usually that change is done by the ops department. Now you are part of that change, which is why I mentioned on the previous slide of chapter 0, like you have a silo mental model. Not just you are having your own ego, but also you don't want to know what happened on the other side. Like dev don't usually don't want to know, okay, I just develop my app, and operation or deployment should be not my part, but they have to know, they have to pay attention what would be the compatibility, what would be the consequences, what would be the possible problem, especially performance. And if you develop web app, server is usually just one or two, maximum four, or maybe you have a load balancer in place. But the problem is not how many server. The problem is if you think about the scaling, about the possibility of supporting large user base, or maybe large, not just user, but also intensity of the application use. For example, if you are going to create apps for mini market that you have more than one branch, then there's a chance that every time there's a transaction, maybe, and I think it's highly possible, at least there will be some scenarios or conditions that you have to support at least 12 requests per second, or maybe 20, or maybe 100 requests per second that keeps hitting the server. And most of the time, the developer, don't realize about this. But on the other hand, operation only knows that, hey, this server is not responding. Why? Why it keeps, humming about more than uh, 60 or 80% of memory, and then somehow the other requests have to wait. There is a certain timeouts. I forgot what the default timeouts in SP.NET Core app. But if that timeouts is keeps hit, then usually the application is going to be having a bad uh, feedbacks, especially, hey, I'm using this app and then I could not do anything, especially on the office hours, for example. Somehow the dev have a way to say, okay, it works on my machine, yeah, and maybe he has done some load testing blindly. But bear in mind that on one machine, if you just keep hitting that machine using a blind load testing without, trying to simulate, okay, in 1 second, I'm going to keep hitting with some kind of test that somehow it runs nearly as close as possible, having a parallel. Like, let's say, on 1 second, there should be at least 50 requests. It's something that usually done by other famous tools such as Gmeter, and there's also other tools. Microsoft also has that kind of load test tool. But I think the easiest way and the most famous way is using Gmeter. And then you can say, okay, there is some problem. We cannot serve or we cannot provide a good reliability, like ensuring that we can process more than, let's say, 20 requests per second. But somehow that knowledge is also not reflected well on the upside. Can be that problem is caused by the RAM or memory is not enough, or there is a subtle problem of having noisy neighbor. Because now in this modern world of deployment, usually app is deployed on VM or on container. If you deploy the app on container, then that container has to sit on a VM, not on a physical server, not physical machine. So any other VM may or may not, may or may not disturb the other VM running, especially when there is a excessive I/O being used or being involved or being activated, because I/O is usually blocking by default, especially I/O that is being used by other VM. Usually, if you have VM, you have more than one disk, but that there is another problem at another time, because if you cannot be sure what's going on that storage, on that I/O, can be it is a operational problem, but it can be on the problem of the apps itself, that having some way to keep assuming that I don't have problems when accessing I/O using a synchronous model or synchronous execution. That way of mentality, you know, will destroy the usability of the app, because I/O is always blocking by default if you do that using synchronous calls. Okay, let's get back to the problem. I say about communication problem because previously they are going to keep blaming each other. Some say to me, okay, then okay, I just use any tools, then let this department just use it. Department use it, but if the communication is not available at all, if the people don't understand, okay, maybe the people understand, but they don't care because they have their own ego. They don't have the same goals to have. Yeah, especially DevOps is actually not just to department being talk to each other, but also having that talk, having the communication should also be established as part of the regular habit. Usually, at least 3 times a week, they should have some meeting. I say at least because you don't have to, have to do some full 1 hour meeting, but 3 times a week, I think, yeah, maybe 2 times. 2 times is the least minimum frequency of having that collaboration. And one of the meeting can be just half hour to say, okay, we have this problem, and we need you to fix this, and I have to inform you that this is clearly maybe on development side, and this thing or that other things will be on the upside operation side. For example, if the testing on the performance characteristics or profiling on the development side already validate that this app with this kind of let's say simulation of having 50 requests per second will not use more than, let's say, 8 gigabytes of RAM for 10 users, for example. But if the server is having something wrong, it may or may not be the fault of the apps. There is something going on here. Like, for example, if you use .NET Framework and you have Windows Server, that .NET Framework runtime will always obey the available .NET Framework version on that Windows Server by default. So if you have Windows Server 2008, you may only have a .NET Framework 3.5 or 3.5 SP1 by default. If you have Windows Server 2012, you may have .NET Framework 4, 4.0 by default. If you have a 2009 or later, you will have at least 4.6 or later. So if you have already used the latest .NET Framework and you are going to deploy to, let's say, Windows Server before 2019, especially now you have .NET Framework 4.8, that might be a problem on the compatibility side, because on server by default you will have 3.5 if you are going to deploy on Windows Server 2008. And I personally would not suggest that, because 2008 is already in the not supported phase, so life cycle is already ended. At least you need to have at least Windows Server 2019, because right now, in order to keep having a mainstream support, you need at least Windows Server 2019. But if you are going to deploy just container, especially you are just going to deploy on cloud, then you have no worries about the OS, because you already been handled by the cloud provider. Either you have a Azure or AWS. But then that kind of knowledge, it has to be understood on by both department, dev and ops. Ops has to know something about the container, and dev has to also have to know something about developing using container. And ops has to know about deploying the container, meaning that at least the basic foundation of having understanding of what container is, those department has to understand. Then we can talk, right? Otherwise, I don't know what you are saying. That is something of a problem. After communication is established, then it should be part of habit. And then you can say, okay, now my people can communicate regularly and they are willing to share anything. They are willing to ask about what's going on, not just sharing, but that kind of sharing has to be done first. So those silos are beginning to be removed. When you have that kind of communication and collaboration, and then you have that regularly, then it will become a habit, like mentioned this as a culture. So that is why mention about people, process, and technology, not technology, people, process, or technology, process, people. No, no. People and process has to come first, especially the people. I prefer to have this kind of a visualization here, the layers of DevOps. So people is the foundational. You need to have people before you can do DevOps, right? That is the simple reason. But other than that, those people not just there and available, also they must communicate, they must collaborate, they also have to agree on certain goals. What exactly the goals depends on, of course, your needs and your priorities, your requirements as well. But there is has to have a common ground. Like for example, hey, I'm going to use container. Let's collaborate on how to deploy this kind of application deployment without any friction, with the highest compatibility. Because usually developer wants to change. You install something, there is a change. You want to update something on the app, there's also change. You need to ensure that the OS is also keeping up with the latest tech tools and technology that development is going to use. It's also change. That might be different if you are going to use .NET Core, but .NET Core actually has its own lifecycle and dependency on the operating system. And starting from .NET 10, they are not going to support Windows 7 and Windows 8 at all. Just to give you some samples, even on the Windows 10 support, .NET Core will not support the early versions of Windows 10, such as Windows 10 15.02, 18.01, something 18.09. No, unfortunately, no. They will not support that. They only support some versions later, such as I think 21.02, 21.04. I forgot, something like 21 or 22. But you can check on the list of the TFM supported in the repo of .NET Core. So that kind of understanding may be not needed by the ops department, but they have to know, okay, I'm going to use this. This app needs some refreshment because Microsoft is not going to support older version or release, for example. And then even they may not be the one or the person or the team that has to decide. They have to be aware, okay, on the app or development side, there is a life cycle. For example, we know that in .NET Core world, those with the old version is usually having 1.5 year of support, which is now is being extended to have 2 years since .NET 9. Every even version, such as .NET 10, .NET 8, they have 3 years support. And with that kind of release or version, they have some kind of synchronization with some OS lifecycle, such as Windows. So .NET 10 will not support Windows 7 and Windows 8 anymore. That means those Windows release that related to Windows 7 or Windows 8, such as Windows Server 2008 or Windows Server 2012, is not supported. This is also in sync with my suggestion before that we need to at least use Windows Server 2019 for now. If you have the chance to try, the GUI of the Windows Server 2019, you'll see it is the server version of Windows 10 actually. So Windows 10 is the client, Windows Server 2019 is the server, but the GUI is basically the same. The version is not exactly the same, of course, but you'll see that Windows Server 2019 also has its own life cycle and also updates as well. They have about every half year update. I I'm I don't I don't remember what would be the exact version of Windows Server actually, but you can check on the internet, of course. Okay, you have the people. This chapter will discuss the people first. Okay, I mentioned about the development and operation departments. I know that there's only one person, but consider this is representing department. So if there is no communication, there is no DevOps, right? They have to have collaboration. And this, again, I mentioned before, it has to be in regular communication, regular collaboration. It doesn't have to be a long meeting because honestly, meeting is okay, but it doesn't have to be every day or daily. I know that there is a daily stand-up meeting if you use Scrum for the development department, but if you want to collaborate with other department, you don't have to do that daily because they have their own works that has to be done first. They have their own priorities, and I know DevOps is not the number one priorities for the operation, including not the number one priorities for the development, right? But DevOps has to be part of the development lifecycle or SDLC, including the operational methodology on the operations. Many kinds of methodology is also available on the operation as well. So I will discuss that later. If you can collaborate and ensure you have a regular communication and each of the communication has a healthy sign that okay, now the silos is starting to be removed or starting to disappear, then you can say that there is no need for a specific DevOps person or lead if the collaboration is running well and it is already an established culture. I mentioned about there is no need for specific DevOps person. That means that there is no need for specific department. This is the very, very basic idea. If you already done, the people already know the responsibility, the boundary of the responsibility, and the responsibility of communicating back and forth. So there is no need for specific DevOps person. But if you are going to have a full integration nicely and uh, measurable, and I mean the not just the activities is measurable, but also the result is also measurable and quantifiable, then you may need a specific DevOps person. I mind you that DevOps person, that person doesn't have to be people that knows all of the development activities, knows all of the infrastructure related activities. If you are opening a job opportunities that needs those kind of requirement, you have to know .NET, you have to know how to deploy to Azure or AWS, and at the same time you have to know CI/CDs. You have to be able to manage Azure DevOps pipeline or pipeline of the AWS code pipeline. Then you are looking for a department. You are not going to look for people. And usually, the people that knows best how to manage deployment, or let's say if you are using VM on AWS, you are using AWS EC2. If you are using Azure, you are using Azure VM. Usually, the one that knows best about how to set up and configure that is the operation guy, because that guy will be the one that not just preparing that kind of environment and setup, ensuring that the operation day to day will be smooth with the optimal or with the best, cost that can be obtained, having the best or optimized, let's say, TCO, total cost of ownership. Because usually the development department doesn't know or doesn't care about that. Okay, now you have the culture. Now you have the collaboration. People is there, right? Because if you don't have all of those, the people, the culture, collaboration, and so on, so on, so on, then you cannot have process and technology. Why? Process may be there, but if the people will not run the process or doesn't care about the process, this process will be useless and it will fail. If the technology is there, especially if you do some procurement, especially some licenses or how many users is being charged and so on, so on, so on, then this will also go useless and wasted. So people comes first, and then after you define the people, the collaboration, then you can have the process. Process is how are we going to do the DevOps? Either you are going to use waterfall, cycle that from A to B to C to D. If you go to from A to B and then B to C, you cannot go back to B or to A. It's like you are imagining a waterfall. So from top to bottom, once you go to a certain bottom level, you cannot go back to top. Right? But if you use agile, you can go back. That also brings its own consequences, right? But I will discuss that later. I'm not going to discuss each of the process. Let me know if you are going to request me about. Please describe the difference of that process. I would love to, but that will be not part of this into DevOps discussion. Okay, I think I'm done explaining the why, and again, now you know that if you say, okay, I already have dev and the ops, and now I have DevOps, especially you said or you told me I've already the person, and then I asked, are you sure that the DevOps is there, especially the people understand it? Are you sure that there is no silo? Are you sure there is no way? You cannot just deploy. You need to ask me first. I'm going to choose if your application is fit to be deployed on this one. No, you cannot deploy because the Windows is not ready yet. That kind of thing is, if it is still there, I can say that you don't have DevOps established. This is why it is not good DevOps. DevOps, if not good, it's the same as not available. Actually, put it simple. I know it's harsh. I know it's rude, but here is the fact: you need to have the people first. And this is why I mentioned in the previous chapter, I have rejected many training requests. Many companies in Jakarta especially ask me to give training on DevOps. I rejected because I usually ask, do you already people in place? Do you already people knows that DevOps is? I'm not just going to give some trainings or let's say using GitHub or Azure DevOps or even GitLab if the people doesn't understand what DevOps is first. Because again, DevOps is actually a culture first, the people first, not the process first, not the technology first. And you can argue with me, but usually every time I ask them back, they don't have the honest answer to me. And I say very respectfully, no, I think I'm not going to give you training because there was, or sorry, there were quite a lot of complaint sent back to me. Hey, your training is not good. Your training doesn't have a good result after I try to implement it. After I have a deep dive discussion and conversations, and then I found out, okay, they don't have the communication, they don't have the collaboration. So people is there. The people, I mean, the availability of people is there, but the collaboration are not there. The communication are not there. So this is why you have the people, but the collaboration is not there. So you don't have a good DevOps. That's simple. No matter what the tools and what the process you use. I now have finished discussing the importance of the people. This is why DevOps is a culture. Next, I'm going to discuss the process, but that process itself is it is still related on the culture. That culture may drive or may not drive the process to be chosen. Again, it's up to you. As long as you already have the people and the collaboration thing established. Okay. Now I have done discussing this. Let me know if you have feedback, comments. Again, as the usual YouTuber, if you like it, you can like and subscribe. Also, please let me know that if you want to have some detailed discussion on the process. Of course, you have discussion on the technology. I would love to, but unfortunately, on the tooling itself, I only knew GitHub and Azure DevOps in detail. I knew GitLab, but only for the source control and also the CI. Honestly, I don't know about the CD of the GitLab. I have not enough experience on that. Yeah, I would like to recommend you if you keep going to ask me, okay, is there any person that I know that understand GitLab? I would love to, yeah. But that is another story, another discussion. Okay, I've done it, and I'll see you in the chapter 2 about the no, not about the process actually. Okay, the putting of the people first. Yeah. The details of the not just the collaboration, of course, but what exactly the soul of the people of the DevOps. Okay, I already mentioned if there's no people, of course there's no DevOps. Then I'm not just going to describe and no DevOps, but also the soul of the DevOps in terms of the people and the perspective of people itself. I'll see you on the next chapter 2. Bye bye.